Okay, let's
Okay,
start.
thank you very much for everyone. So, before we start, could you please switch off your microphone or maybe camera as well, so that Jonathan, you don't need to off your camera. You can just do on. So after the presentation, you can raise your hand for asking question and type question in the chat box as well. So, welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today for the next presentation of our Rewild Institution Personal series. Many thanks for the European Wilderness Society for the amazing collaboration and for providing platform for this webinar. Thanks to Max, Jonas, and all others. For the presentation topics and dates you find on wilderness.academy and Rewild Institute too. You are also very welcome to the first International Wilderness Week in mid-October, a worldwide online 5-day conference on wilderness. Feel free to submit abstract for presentation and tell your colleague as well. Many thanks to Jonathan, who is giving a presentation today. Jonathan is a founder of OWL project, that was an eco solution, as well as the team member of Rewild Institute. Uh, Today's presentation topics is owl and bat conservation in Southern Africa. Jonathan has received a Special Achievement Award in 2018 during the International Festival of Owl from the United States. So now, Jonathan will start the presentation. Please, Jonathan, go ahead.
Thanks, Raju. Okay, there's not that many of us on this group, so I think while I'm talking, if there are any questions or any discussions that people want to have in the presentation itself, maybe we should allow for that. I don't know how everyone feels about that, but okay, I'm going to just start. So we're talking about owl and bat conservation in Southern Africa, and just as an overview, I'll start with owls and then later on we'll get into bats. So from an owl perspective, South Africa has the same problems that every other country has in terms of degradation of ecosystems, land practice, agricultural practice that impact on wildlife across the board. But we also have quite a few, or we have a couple of unique aspects to our conservation issues in this country and in Africa in general. And I know, mythology is global, but African mythology relating to owls and African mythology relating to all sorts of species is still, education hasn't caught up to mythological fear in a lot of cases. So there's still some pretty bizarre African beliefs or beliefs in Africa about other animals. And we find predominantly, or in the main, a lot of the species that are targeted for mythological fears or mythological beliefs are nocturnal. So, there's a kind of theory out there that just around the world, nocturnal species don't generally get as much protection as diurnal species, just because they're not really in our field of view, so to speak. So we're very quick to identify problems with our diurnal pangolins, things like that. But once we get into nocturnal species, we don't focus on them as much as some of the others. So in South Africa, we'll just start at the beginning. So in this project, we had a couple of objectives. So we've always had a few objectives, and that was to look at traditional healers, which we have are commonplace in Southern Africa. We wanted to look at how owls were used in traditional medicine. I mean, what would be the traditional medicine value of owls? And we also wanted to look at muti and mythology. So these are the main areas that we've concentrated on. South Africa is an interesting country because of things like apartheid. And when we look at our traditional healers, South Africa was one of the few countries that was actually passing witchcraft laws as late as 1957, where most countries around the world were repealing those laws. We were actually enacting those laws. So we have a law passed in 1957 called the Suppression of Witchcraft Act, which was really an apartheid tool to try and silence traditional healers and make them illegal. That's what it was. But that has since been repealed, in fact, or it's been repealed in about 2016, so not very long ago. But what happened after apartheid was a lot of traditional healers started to, they weren't policed, they weren't suppressed, and they started to emerge into the light. It started to become more and more of a you know, people went back to traditional healers, or traditional healers were no longer secret. They could come into the open and they could practice their traditional healing in the open. And there's a lot of value in traditional healers in this country. It's a lot of it is plant-based medicine, you know, and it's historic. There've been traditional healers since the beginning, and a large percentage of our population still use traditional healers. One of the things that's happened is that traditional healers are now trying to become members of the Health Professional Council of South Africa. So they're lobbying to become part of the professional council. And the main reason for this is so that traditional healers can prescribe medicine, and also, you know, give people time off for sick leave, allocate, or, you know, sign a doctor's note saying people are sick. And that's raised serious concerns for a lot of the health professional people in South Africa, because they, you know, they can't get away from the fact that someone might be booked off work for a week because a black cat walked in front of their path, that sort of thing, which is a concern for industry, or they've been bewitched, or something's happened to them and they're now allowed to be booked off work legitimately, be paid for sick leave, although the reason they're off might be concerning to a lot of corporates and professional health members themselves. So there's financial implications of that, or the potential for that. Traditional healers, who uses traditional healers? So what we found, I mean, you would think that traditional healers would be used by very rural people, people in poor areas, or people in living out in the country that have a history of traditional healer use. But actually, we have traditional healers being used by people across the board.
Witchcraft Healers in Südafrika und das Retten der
Can I carry on?
Der diversen anderen Tiere.
Can I carry on? Hello?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I can carry on. Okay, so essentially we get traditional healers that are being used by people from street cleaners all the way up to accountants and lawyers and you know, highly professional people. And this is just because South Africa has gone through a change. Since the end of apartheid, there's been a lot more tertiary education for people who previously didn't have that, or what that wasn't available to them. So you're getting accountants and lawyers that are out there whose parents used traditional healers when they were kids. So there's a historic they'll continue to go to traditional healers when they're unwell. So even educated people are using traditional healers. And they've got traditional healers they do everything. They bring back lost lovers, they return stolen money. I don't know if you can all see this sign board here, which is all troubled marriage, sorts out troubled marriages, court cases, pregnancy problems, lost lovers and friends, bad luck. They can virtually do anything. And they are, the thing about South Africa is that, here's a picture of what a traditional healer looks like. This is a traditional healer shop in downtown Johannesburg. A lot of it is still plant-based, and the word muti actually means plant. So a lot of it is still plant-based, but we were really interested in the owl relationship with owls. But also in South Africa, you've got a lot of people, the borders are quite porous. So people are coming in from Zimbabwe, from Botswana, from Nigeria, from all over Africa, and they're bringing their own medical or traditional medical requirements with them. So in Johannesburg, you've got little kind of downtown suburbs in a way that are Nigerian or people from Gabon or people from different parts of Africa, and they all have traditional medicine that might differ. So you get very different areas of or supplying different needs or providing to different people's needs. That's pretty much a market in downtown Johannesburg. And you can see in the front here, there's a whole lot of birds of prey, kites, they use vultures, they use owls, there's a whole lot of bones here, there's a leopard skin up hanging on the wall. And these things are, they're used to cure various ailments. There's two kinds of muti. There's a white muti and a black muti. White muti is generally for plant-based medicine, curing things. Black muti is for cursing and putting spells on people, and often your animal products are used more towards or more predominantly in black muti. So that's the market, and you can see a lot of plants, a lot of wild ginger, lots of different things that people use. So we wanted to work out what the situation was with owls in these markets. Now, previously, when we first went into these places, maybe 15 years ago, what we were finding is we weren't seeing very many owls, and we were seeing a very low turnover. So if we went in January, we'd find an owl on a table that was, had a bit removed from it, maybe a wing removed or a foot removed, and we'd go back in August and we'd find the same owl, obviously with more things taken from it, but it indicated that, a marsh owl on a table had been there for a year, and the usage and the turnover of those owls on tables was very low. Since then, we've seen an increase in that turnover. And we're not sure if it's because the demand has increased, because you've got all these migrant workers in South Africa, or just the fact that in the past, all these things were kept under the table, and they're now being positioned on the table and brought into the light, and there's no control or no policing or enforcement, so they don't have to hide them. So this is what we wanted to look at. So we did a questionnaire to traditional healers at these markets, and I think we spoke to about 100, 120 traditional healers. It should be in here, but we asked them specific questions, which was how they used owls, what they used owls for, predominantly what species they were using, and whether they were meeting the supply and demand in terms of the way they were managing the owls coming into these markets in the first place. And here's some of the questionnaire. So it was, how do you get hold of these species? People bring them to me. Once they get a reputation or that they're recognized as someone who will take owls, people will bring them owls specifically to that table, and they'll pay that person, mostly dead. Now, this was one of the things that we found that was quite interesting, was the species of owl. The species of owls concurred with the fact that predominantly these owls are picked up dead on the side of the road. So there were barn owls, spotted eagle owls, marsh owls, all of those common vehicle collision victims. And often you could see it on the table. The owl was on the table, but you could see that it had been hit by a car. So they weren't actively going out and taking owls from nests or collecting, Pell's fishing owls and those kind of giant eagle owls and things like that. They were really just collecting roadkill for their owls. But their prices and things, they were selling them when they were using them for things. I mean, you can see some of these answers here when they were asked, how much do you sell them for? The one guy said about 4,000 Rand, which is what? It's not a lot nowadays in terms of the South African exchange rate. That's about $250. If it was to bring bad luck to someone, and $6,000 to remove, or 6,000 Rand, $350 to remove bad luck. So obviously, to send some bad luck to someone was cheaper than to remove bad luck. But so these were the questions that these guys answered, and it was difficult getting answers out of them. A lot of them were very suspicious, but they answered all these questionnaires, and most of them knew the roles that owls played in the environment. They knew that owls ate rats. They knew, they were aware of those kind of things, and some of them were pretty knowledgeable. So there were 417 tables in these markets that we went to look at. Majority of them were plant species. 60 of those tables had avian species present. Some form of bird was on 60 of these tables, and 90% of those avian tables had owls present. So in one place we found 2 live owls. Those were the only live owls we found. The majority, the rest of them were all dead. And one of the things in the questionnaire was the guys were saying they'd pay more for live owls than for dead owls. One of these questions was, does the supply, do you meet the supply? And they were all saying for dead owls they've got enough, but they want more live owls. They want more live owls, which is a little concerning. So in terms of muti, here's a picture that was in a newspaper. I actually had the video at some stage, but it was difficult to upload onto this. So this was an owl's, you can see there. I don't know if my mouse works on this thing, but you can see the owl's head wrapped up with string, and all of this stuff was put into a little tin and buried in someone's garden. And owls in South Africa are believed to be the messenger of the witch doctor and the messenger of death, essentially. That's what they represent to a lot of people. So in terms of dealing, and also it's expensive. I mean, on that video, that guy was talking about spending something like 60,000 Rand, which is equivalent to about $10,000 to have a curse removed because it was affecting his life and affecting his family's life. And the owl was that was from the owl in the tin. So there's quite a lot of money spent on those things. The tables were basically getting about 70 owls a month that were coming across those tables. And they were very much specialists who dealt with them. They weren't just the run-of-the-mill guys at these traditional tables. And these were the species: spotted eagle owl, barn owls, and marsh owl. Those were the three species we found predominantly. So in terms of resolving this or trying to work out a way to fix this, there were three options, or there's three available kind of remedies. One is legislation, the other is enforcement of that legislation, and the third one was education. In terms of legislation, owls are actually quite well protected in South Africa. They're protected under the National Environmental Management and Biodiversity Act. You need permits to keep an owl, to capture an owl, to transport an owl. All of those things are in place. The legislation's in place, but the enforcement is pretty much non-existent for a few reasons. Sometimes the people who are supposed to be enforcing these things actually use owls themselves and are scared of owls and are kind of aware of the muti involved in owls, and so they're not going to enforce it. And also, it's you know, South Africa has real kind of flagship conservation issues like rhinoceros, like nowadays like pangolin, things like that, and they seem to be where most of the focus goes, not on things like owl species at traditional healers tables. Also, there's been a real shift in the education and the ability of a lot of the conservation staff in South Africa. They've been, you know, slowly there's been a sort of degradation of training, things like that over the years. And a lot of the conservation staff are it's very understaffed most of the time. And also they're very undertrained too. A lot of them won't know what an owl is if they saw it. So they don't really know what they're looking for. This is a picture that was put up. It was actually put up on the side of the road. But the reality of it, I mean, it's a bit of a joke, but somewhere in South Africa, there was a sign put up of a kudu jumping up, and someone had written baboon, had put the baboon sign underneath it, not realizing that was a mistake. And it's just to indicate, in some respects, the lack of real training and understanding. So legislation was there, enforcement was non-existent. The only other method of dealing with this was education, and that's kind of the route that we've taken. And it started as educating children about owls and about the value of owls in their environment, but it's quickly spread. It's educated up. It's almost like a parent education program that's been implemented by the children who participate, because there's a couple of things in a lot of the areas in townships in South Africa. Kids don't have television, they don't have access to books or the internet. It's very difficult to educate them through media or social media. There's the mythological owl is often, when I speak to people about the mythological owl and I show them a barn owl or a spotted eagle owl, they'll quickly say that's not the mythological owl that they're scared of. The mythological owl often comes across as a fire-breathing owl. It has all those kind of things about it that are scary. It's not the owl they actually see. But the live owl program essentially was, we were receiving all these baby owls through rehabilitation centers, and that had actually been taken, a lot of them had been taken out of townships themselves because people were scared of owls. And then they were finding their way into rehabilitation centers, into zoos. They were being kept by zoos. They were being released in poor areas and things like that. So we decided to take those young owls and get schools, participating schools, to handle the release of those owls back into the exact environment where they'd been found. And this work has worked very well, because the schools themselves are actually quite good release sites for owls. They're quiet at night. The school's in a very built-up area. Barn owls are found in very densely populated areas. But the kids used to feed them when they were youngsters and release them from a hacking box, pretty much working on the same principles as the Peregrine Fund did when they were hacking peregrines in the United States. So they would they'd look after these owls. The school was quiet at night, and also it was quite big. It was an area in a built-up area that had a bit of space. It had a soccer field, and the school itself had space for these owls to fledge. And you know, so far as I know, there's been about 1,000 owls that have been released through this program. It's also quite good science in some respects. It's just putting them back where we find them and releasing them as quickly as possible as youngsters. So they fledge around the school, and that seems to work quite well. They're all ringed, and we get ring recoveries. And also the youngsters feeding these owls take some responsibility for them, but also some, they become, you know, they feel like they have ownership of these things. So we've had a phone call from someone off on a school safari who saw a barn owl, who contacted us and said our barn owl was in the Kruger National Park. I mean, it wasn't, but they feel proprietous about barn owls, which works very well. In terms of township owls, where we get these owls from, this is a roof inside it. There's a photograph of where this house was in one of these areas, and this was the roof inside that that house with these eggs. And I think there were about 9 between chicks and eggs. I think this clutch was about nine eggs to begin with. We got called in. We then look for a school, and you can see a school in this picture with a big open area in the school, and that's where we'll take them. We'll take them from that house where the guy doesn't want them and he wants them gone, and we'll take them to the nearest school and release them from there. This is a few weeks that we actually left those eggs and chicks for them to hatch before we moved them. And this is inside that guy's roof in somewhere near Springs. But here's a nest of, these are all chicks. They're all fledged, they're youngsters. They were all, this was all eggs. They hatched, and these are all the barn owls in this chimney in a house in a township home. And they all fledged. We went back there later, and there was 3 in the nest, and then we went back, there was nothing in the nest, and they're all packed in there like sardines. But it just gives you an indication of how the shortage of suitable sites. Well, I mean, this is a suitable site because it produced 8 young, but the fact that barn owls are pretty tenacious and can breed anywhere in these areas. And the main factor for them here is just the abundance of rats. These townships have huge rodent problems because litter is high, lots of litter, sanitation is poor, people are poor, and so that's why we're getting these barn owls in there. The threats to this program that we found, okay, is the NSPCA. We actually work very closely with them, but they have policies that, you know, they were opposed to children being involved in owl raising, and they kind of thought that a specialized person should be involved in feeding owls. But we've kind of worked our way through that. And in terms of mortality with owls in these boxes, I don't know what it is offhand, but out of all the owls we've released, it's unbelievably low. I mean, barn owls are quite easy to raise. As long as they're getting food, they survive. So if we've had a 2 or 3% mortality rate, I don't even think we've had that. It's the owls survive, they fledge. Post-fledging is obviously a different story, but actually these kids raising them, they come to school on Sundays, they feed them, they've got a teacher, headmaster involved, which is a very important component. Animal rights and other affiliated organizations, well, they haven't been too much of a problem for us. And a lot of it is things like that. If someone picks up an owl with a ring in it in a township, you know, they're very... it becomes an easy target to say, well, this project's not working because we found an owl with a ring on the main road. But it doesn't really reflect the success or of a program like this. Let's go to, okay, so 75 schools have participated. I think at the moment 260,000 children have been part of this program in one way or another. 1156 owlets have been hacked from participating schools. And the interesting thing about this is these kids have to go home and they have to get their parents to sign a consent form. And in doing this, actually, the parents are being educated because kids are going home and saying, this is what we're doing, we're releasing owls, this is what they eat, and what have you, and teaching their parents. And one of the interesting things about South Africa is because pre-apartheid or during apartheid, a lot of parents didn't get adequate schooling. And they love the fact that their children are attending school and being educated. It's a real joy to them that their children are now, that kind of education is available. So they tend to listen very carefully to what their kids are saying because a lot of it's new to them too. So that consent form, the mythological consent, they sign that they're happy for their kids to participate, has actually been very interesting. And what we've done as we've moved along is just give you an idea of what a township looks like. Okay, this is one in a lot of them townships were created around Johannesburg and places like that, fundamentally to service the mining industry. And you can see in the back of that picture, there's a start of a mine dump going up, a gold mine dump. And so all of that gold mine dust and all of those things is relatively unhealthy. But this is where people live in townships, and this is where rodents, and this is where barn owls live too. So the message has been very simple. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Rats are my enemy in this environment or in this life, and barn owls are the enemy of the rat. So therefore, the kind of inference is that the owl must be my friend. The problem we have in South Africa is we have access to aldicarb. Now, aldicarb was temic. It's been called in townships, they call it two-step, because they say rats take 2 steps before they die. And it's created a lot of problems in South Africa because it's sold at taxi ranks as rat poison. So you get a little black bag of aldicarb or temic, and people take it home and they put it out for rats. And often the way they try and poison rats with it is they put it in South Africa, the main staple is mealie meal, maize meal. So they'll take the maize meal that's left over after dinner and they'll put this aldicarb into the maize meal and they'll strategically place it around the kitchen where they've seen rats or rat issues. And we have over 100 deaths a year of kids that have come through and picked up that maize meal and eaten it. And aldicarb kills them. It's actually, temic aldicarb is illegal in most places in the world, but we still get it in South Africa. And these are the kind of things that happen. This is the Sun newspaper, but they're talking about giant killer rats. But a 3-month-old baby girl was eaten alive, or she was killed by rats after her mother left home to go on a drinking binge. We get these kind of things. Rats are a big problem in these areas. There's no doubt about it. So most of these kids do owl pellet dissection. So all the owl pellets we get from all over the place, the kids get a little bottle. And I think I've got there they are, and a key, and on that bottle there is the coordinates for where these pellets come from. This was before gloves and masks were mandatory around the world. The only time we'd use them was for these owl pellet dissection days. But these kids break up those pellets, they work out what it is, and then they put them back in the bottle and they send them to us, or they send a photograph of what they found. And if we see something remarkable, we'll pull that bottle and we'll have a look at what it is. But generally what they're doing is just establishing that owls eat rats and telling their parents, and we even get their parents doing these pellet dissection days. And I think at this stage, I'm not sure Sarah would be able to better explain this, but as far as I know, it's definitely the largest owl citizen science program in the country, in South Africa. But I mean, there's over 1,000 pellets there that these kids have dissected and put onto a database with the coordinates of where that owl nest is. They also participate in once a year days like these, owl art days, and they get certificates of being owl friendly children and the participation in the project. And then they do owl art. And I mean, we've got thousands of these. This is just a photograph of some of them, but there's actually thousands of them knocking around my office and everywhere. And these little owls, they all paint them individually, and every year we have a different theme. But they're all made out of recycled wood. And in fact, they come out of where we put up owl boxes at these schools, and we cut the doorway for owls to get in. These are made out of those offcuts from the owl boxes themselves. So there's a kind of a nice, it works out well. In terms of gathering information about the success of this program, we give questionnaires out. This is just a couple of the slides from that questionnaire, because I know that this is going to go into an MSc somewhere. So I'm not quite sure what I can put up here and what I can't. But do you think owls are scary? And the participated kids and the we took, I can't actually remember offhand, I think it was 1,000 kids from schools that participated, and we compared them to 1,000 kids from schools who hadn't participated. And the difference was dramatic. I mean, the kids who participated didn't think owls were scary. The kids that hadn't participated did, and it was pretty clear to see. Do you think owls can be used for medicine or muti? Had the same results. And I think these were people who participated. And do you think owls help nature? And this was the same kind of results. But the interesting thing about these questionnaires was we sent them home to the parents as well. And the parents had to do them. And the fascinating thing was the parents, answers to these questions very much mirrored their children. So the parents didn't believe owls could be used, or thought owls weren't to be used for muti. They thought they were good for nature. All of those things of the kids that had participated, the parents of the kids who hadn't had the same view as their children, that owls were scary and that sort of thing. And just as an interesting sideline to this is we've just dealt with owls and these kids, but we've dealt with the environment, we've dealt with litter, we've dealt with all of those things. And we did I haven't done too much, or gone too far down this road, but we've put out a couple of questionnaires to kids about bats, because we also do work with bats. And the strange thing is the kids who've participated in the owl project appear to be more bat friendly than the kids who haven't participated. So at the end of the day, the message might be owl conservation, but really it's just conservation. It's about kids learning about awe for their environment and for other species other than themselves. And that's quite a big thing in these places, because a lot of these kids are, there's their child households, there's HIV is a huge problem in Africa, and there's poverty. So a lot of their needs are really just their needs to feed themselves and to clothe and shelter themselves. So to start appreciating other species other than themselves, or having a conservation ethic is very good. And a headmaster of one of these schools, and headmasters are critical because they kind of manage this thing. They're the ship's captain. They make sure it all works. But a headmaster said to me that the beauty of this project was exactly that it teaches kids to nurture a species other than themselves. They don't have dogs and cats, so they put out cat food or dog food. So essentially, that's how this project works. And the last picture is a whole lot of kids in a township looking at a whole lot of baby owls that have come out of a roof. There's a little girl here waving at them. I really like this picture. I always think our next environmental minister in South Africa is going to come from one of these kids, who was exposed to these things as a youngster. Okay, can I, that's the end of the owl session. Can I talk to whoever the moderator is? Ingrid, Raju. Can I talk to anybody? Is anybody there?
Yeah,
hello?
I'm here. I can hear you.
Is everyone else left?
No.
No.
They're all there. They're all there.
You should have told me ages ago. I would have left. Okay, but how's my time? Should I wind this up? Should I go into bats? Where are we in time-wise?
You can go on with this small group. We all love listening to you.
Okay, the bats is going to be pretty quick, so I'll shoot through there. Okay, so I know this is about bat conservation in South Africa, and we're pretty involved in bat conservation in South Africa, but at the moment, we're doing two things. We're doing pest control in agriculture using bats, and we're doing bats, synanthropic bats in urban areas. It's because of COVID and the kind of confused correlation between where bats are. We're getting a lot of calls from people in cities saying, "There's bats in my roof. We want them gone. We're going to move into a hotel until the bats are gone." So we're dealing with a lot of that. It's not necessarily misinformation, but it's a misinformed fear of insectivorous bats and their ceilings. So bats are protected in South Africa. It's one of the things, we actually have quite good conservation laws in this country. Our problem is implementing them, enforcing them, things like that. That we can't do. But the laws themselves are in place and they work well. And you need a permit to deal with bats, to move bats around, to exclude bats, that kind of thing. And this is just a copy of that permit. Strangely enough, we're the only permitted country and company in South Africa to do bat work, but there wasn't a permit required. So we approached nature conservation and we laid down the framework of what the permit should look like, what the conditions of the permit should be, and then we applied for the permit that we had actually created, hoping that we could entice the whole pest control industry or pest control companies that deal with bats to actually become more regulated through a permit process. And this is still a bit of a work in progress at the moment. Bat house deal breakers, this is just in terms of our experiences: poor design of bat houses, poor construction, poor placement. Those are the three things that really affect bat house occupancy in our experience. Here's okay, so this is quite an interesting little graph. This is to do with people and bats in South Africa, well, probably the same around the world. But what it indicates is we get phone calls from people saying, there's bats in my roof, I want them excluded. And invariably, those phone calls come in right in the height of bat breeding season. And you can see that from this little graph. Our blue line is our incoming calls. And you can see that our highest incoming calls are November, December. And that is when bats are breeding in South Africa. So people notice they've got bats in the roof. They want them gone. They want them excluded at the very worst time for bats, because they've got pups. They're leaving those pups in the roof. To go and close that roof off either leaves the youngsters or the pups in the roof to die, or they die from all sorts of other things, exposure, ending up on the ground, cats, dogs, and the rest of it. So we can't exclude at that time. So what you're finding is your calls for help are coming in at absolutely the wrong time for bats, and at a time that we can't exclude them. Because there's no regulation in South Africa, a lot of pest control companies will go in and exclude bats. And we hear horror stories about people collecting a whole roost of bats in a plastic packet and driving them off into the country and throwing them out on the side of the road. And, you know, even though they're protected, they still have a pest kind of portfolio or a pest image in a lot of people's minds. So this is one of the things. You can see our exclusion line, which is a gray line, is almost zero, well, is zero, over the time when bat calls are at their highest. And it's difficult to get people to wait. Often they've heard something or seen something, and they want the bats gone. So that's one of our one of the difficult things. We're trying to regulate this whole industry so that across the board, everybody agrees that we don't exclude bats in November, December, January, and also during hibernation during the winter months. These are just temperature tests of the different bat boxes that we design. So bats are highly susceptible to, they want, as we know, they want consistent temperature fluctuations. They don't want spikes up and down. So these are just boxes that we tested. And these are the different bat boxes we use in the work that we do. There's a nice video, but I wasn't able to upload it. So these are bat boxes for agriculture, either on a building or out in the field. These are different bat banks. And obviously, the bigger you can make the bat bank, the better, because buildings in theory should work better, because the bat box takes on the kind of thermal mass of the building itself. So even out in the field, if you can put a whole lot together, it increases the thermal mass of that structure and allows for more consistency in terms of temperature. The work that we do now in agriculture is putting these bat boxes up. We measure proximity to water because bats drink a lot. We measure occupancy, and we're always continuously trying to work towards a perfect bat box design. One of the things we found in terms of orientation of these bat boxes is in cities, you know, a lot of the time we get a northwest orientation as a preference, but in some cases we don't. And this was in Levubu, we didn't. We got an east-facing preference, and then followed by south. So we think that orientation of the bat boxes is important, but we don't think it is. It overrides other considerations. So in Levubu, we've got prevailing winds that come in from wherever, you know, they're different to the Western Cape, for example. And maybe bats are choosing bat houses with orientations that are less affected by prevailing winds than afternoon sun. But this is all. Finally, here's a bat box that I think we all should be, I mean, we want to put up a couple of these this year. And this is a proper bat hotel. This can hold 100,000 bats. It's magnificent. This was put up in Florida, and I'd like to see these in parks and open areas around South Africa, you know, especially in suburban areas, because then when you're excluding bats from houses, you're providing them with an absolute fantastic alternative in their nearest park. I haven't really, the bat bit was a bit sketchy. I'm sorry about that in terms of my presentation. But yeah. And that's my final slide. To the Bat Cave Robin. Off we go. Are we okay?
Jonathan.
Yes, sir.
Last picture. Why do we actually need these bat hotels and bat? I mean, I see in the background trees. I see that you're setting them up in a semi-natural environment. Why is the need to have these so high that you're actually thinking of putting these artificial structures out there?
A lot of, you know, when those pictures you see of the trees, a lot of those trees are firstly exotics, okay? And that's not really the problem as much as bats would roost behind the bark of trees. Dead trees were a huge source of bat roost sites. Most of these agricultural areas, most of these places don't have any dead trees. There's a shortage of cavities. So these boxes really just are there to represent artificial cavities for bats to breed in, where historically, you know, dead trees have been removed because they've planted crops, holes have been filled in, caves are no longer available, old buildings, things like that have been knocked down. So we're finding bats there in structures, old structures or pump houses and things, but we think that there's a shortage of suitable roost sites, and that's a limiting factor for them. So providing these bat houses is attempting to take care of that. Okay. Anybody else? That's it. Okay. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me. Everybody
Ingrid?
gone?
No. They're all there. I can see it. Ingrid?
Yes. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for your presentation. And thank you very much, Max, and the European Wilderness Society for providing this platform and for collaborating. And is Raju there?
Oh, yeah, I'm here. I don't know what happened.
Okay,
If anybody have any question, please raise your hand, or you can write in the chat box as well.
Raju, we've had a few questions.
Me?